So I defer to you guys, really. I mean, we added, I guess, later in the day yesterday, so we asked around October. I can proactively put those questions out there, or we can just let it.
I wouldn't generate ideas, dialogue about those countries because it's like
Okay, perfect.
Not happy stuff.
Test.
They ask a question, we know what to say. I wouldn't put it out
That's
there.
what I wanted to make sure we were all on the same page.
We need to do a mic check.
We've got everything we need. If we have
Right.
Probably not.
Phones are off. Great.
2 till?
2 minutes early.
Is the
Okay. We're going to go right at 10? Or? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Do we need mic check?
Is done it?
Done it? Good. Perfect. Good morning. Thank you all for joining us today. Also, I'd like to say to everybody, Happy New Year. My name is Kirk Bell. I'm Deputy Vice President for Congressional and Public Affairs here at MCC. We're excited to have you all here today participating in the quarterly town hall. Those who are with us here in Washington, and many more joining us online from across the U.S. and around the world. As part of MCC's commitment to transparency, we host these town hall events after each quarterly board meeting. They give us an opportunity to share updates on what MCC is working on, highlight recent discussions with our board, and to hear from you. We're pleased to have Robert Blau, Dan Barnes, and Chris Dunn joining us today for our town hall. We encourage you to participate as well and to send us questions. There are a few easy ways to do that. You can tweet us your question using the hashtag MCCTownHall or using our handle at MCCGov. Or send us an email at events@mcc.gov. For those here in the room, please write your questions on the provided note cards. So they will be collected by my colleagues, Lindsay and Katie. There's Lindsay back there. We'll take all the questions at the end. I'd like to turn now over to Chris Dunn, who will give us a quick overview of MCC fall activities in the board meeting, and then we'll hear from Robert Blau, our Vice President for the Department of Compact Operations, on the closeout of our compact with Cabo Verde.
Thanks, Kirk, and good morning, everybody, and Happy New Year as well. As Kirk said, I'm Chris Dunn. I'm the Acting Chief of Staff here at MCC. And I wanted to start off by just providing a brief readout on some key operational updates since our last town hall. But before I get into that, some late-breaking news that maybe some of you have already seen in the media, but just late yesterday, the President announced his intent to nominate Sean Cairncross as the Chief Executive Officer for MCC. Mr. Cairncross currently serves as Deputy Assistant to the President and Special Advisor to the Chief of Staff. Prior to joining the White House, Mr. Cairncross served as the Chief Operating Officer for the Republican National Committee in the 2016 election cycle. Prior to that, Mr. Cairncross held a variety of distinguished positions in the private sector. We are really looking forward to working with the White House on the process leading up to the confirmation hearing and vote for Mr. Cairncross before the Senate. So that's for those joining us today, get the benefit of getting the immediate news. Turning back to some of these operational updates, one of the highlights since the last quarter was actually the signing of our compact with the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire on November 7th at the State Department. We were pleased that Côte d'Ivoire's President Ouattara was able to actually preside over the ceremony at the State Department, demonstrating once again Côte d'Ivoire's commitment not just to MCC, but to a partnership with the United States. The $525 million program will support growth and private investment by building workforce capacity, reducing transportation costs, and opening new markets with a focus in Abidjan and some outer regions of the country. There's a lot of great information about the compact and our partnership with the government of Côte d'Ivoire on the website. You can find that at mcc.gov. In November, I'm also pleased to report that we launched MCC's $49 million Kosovo Threshold Program. Our Chief Operating Officer, Jonathan Nash, was honored to travel with Representative Elliot Engel to Pristina. As some of you may know, Representative Engel is a longtime champion of both Kosovo as well as MCC. And they were there celebrating the establishment of the Millennium Foundation Kosovo, which is the unit that will manage implementation of the Kosovo Threshold Program. At the other end of the spectrum, on November 30th, MCC celebrated the successful closeout of our $66 million compact partnership with Cabo Verde. As Kirk mentioned, Robert will be providing a readout about and telling us more about the compact and those closure events. We were also gratified over the last quarter to see this great work being recognized. Specifically, MCC's rigorous approach to measuring and evaluating results was recognized last quarter when the agency ranked first among 8 federal agencies in Results for America's 2017 Federal Invest in What Works Index. The index highlights the extent to which federal agencies build the infrastructure necessary to use data, evidence, and evaluation in budget, policy, and management decisions. But stepping back, it's ultimately the agency's talented and dedicated staff that make all of this possible, and this is why MCC has been focused on organizational health and effectiveness as a top priority over the last 18 months. And just last quarter, we started to see these efforts paying off, with MCC seeing the largest gains among all federal agencies for which data is available in the Partnership for Public Services 2017 Best Places to Work in the Federal Government. It's a jump of 13.8 points in terms of raw data. So even as we celebrate these successes and these partnerships, we're also looking forward to our future partnerships, and that's really what our December board meeting was all about. The meeting was held on December 19th, and I think as many of you know, and as Dan will talk about, this is the meeting at which our board of directors selects countries to be eligible for MCC assistance, either through compacts or threshold programs. And this year, the board selected Timor-Leste for a compact partnership and the Gambia for a threshold program partnership. Dan Barnes from our Department of Policy and Evaluation will talk more about the board's decision from the annual selection meeting. But before we jump into that, as we said, I want to turn it over to our Vice President for Compact Operations, Robert Blau, to share more about the closeout of the Cabo Verde Compact. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I just saw yesterday a news story that ranked Cabo Verde as one of the top tourist destinations in the world. And I thought, boy, wouldn't it be nice to be in Cabo Verde today? It's probably 80 degrees and sunny and balmy winds and so on. But anyway, the closeout at the end of November was a real great example of teamwork, in the sense that our MCC office there, the resident country mission, the Millennium Challenge account, the Cabo Verdean organization that worked with them, the Cabo Verdean government, the U.S. Embassy, all of us together put together a really, really great program that, on the one hand, closed out the compact with some ceremonies and speeches and so on, but also actually carried out some last-minute activities that were emblematic of the compact. For example, turning a valve that opened up water to flow to parts of the island where the capital, Praia, sits. So there was some actual operational events that happened on the very last day, as well as the closeout. Cabo Verde was an exemplary partner for MCC. It's one of the highest performers on the scorecard that we measure all of our countries, and it was the first country to have a second compact and, of course, to complete a second compact. And the compact focused on 2 areas. One was water. This is a country that is constantly suffering from drought, and the other was land ownership. In the sense that the land tenure laws and mapping were insufficient. And the investments are aimed to reduce poverty in the archipelago by removing these constraints. And this involved both policy reform and some actual in infrastructural developments. As I mentioned, getting the water to flow on part of the island. So, as I said, the water program is out of the $66 million, $41 million was the water and sanitation project, and a lot of this was like really inside baseball bureaucracy. There were inefficient water utility companies that were almost competing for business, and the project consolidated them into one common one, and streamlined the bureaucracy and the operations. And as I said before, there was some very excellent ideas in the design that included some visible improvements. So, for example, we met some people on São Vicente Island where they were beneficiaries of some grants that would actually bring running water to their homes. So there was a guy, the picture will loop around. There was a gentleman by the name of John Deere who is a handicapped guy. You see him walks with a limp and is kind of stumped over, but yet he made himself a community leader and was the one who spoke on behalf of his community to bring one of these projects to where he lived. And we visited his house, and he had running water where he didn't before, and he was very, very proud to show us the meter on the outside of his house that would measure the volume of water that he used every month. And what was ironic was that with water coming in from the municipal water system, it actually cost him less in his monthly outlay than it used to cost him to go with buckets to a standpipe and get water and pay for the amount of water he would buy at the standpipe. We also visited a woman by the name of Crisolita, and she showed us her very humble home, but now it's not quite as humble in that it has running water and plumbing inside where it didn't before. So she's just thrilled for that, but also thrilled for having more time because again she doesn't have to go out and fetch water, so she has more time to devote to raising her children and doing her business, which is baking little cakes and selling them. The land project was aimed at creating an easy accessible source of land rights and boundaries. So there's a lot of legwork, mapping and updating documents, and then computerizing all of that. So now that it's not completely done for all the islands, it's completely done for some of the archipelago, but the government is committed to picking up where we left off. And of course, they have the skills now because they know how to do this, having done it in some of the islands. So what we did visit, besides visiting some actual land that has now been mapped out, we visited the Central Registry Office, where any citizen can go and get a land title for a small fee and have it, a document in hand, which of course is a great basis for a real estate market and business. If previously you were uncertain about who owns the land and so on, now that's being made more predictable. So, looking ahead, I feel confident that Cabo Verde will follow through and sustain the investments that we made. The best example of that was from the first compact. There was a lot of infrastructure built, particularly the modernization of the port. And when we visited the port director walked us through how much MCC had actually financed and built with the Cabo Verdeans. And then where we left off, he showed what they've done since then with other financing and other contractors, following the original blueprint that we laid out in the first compact. So I'm really confident that Cabo Verde will follow through on the investments in the second compact, as they've made what I think is a pretty solid commitment to that. So these are all examples of why Cabo Verde was a good partner in the first place, and how we're really pleased that they ended on such a high note. We also note that the Luxembourg Development Agency is going to work with the government of Cabo Verde to implement and build on some of the water reform projects. So Cabo Verde finishes. We're actually going to do a gig next Tuesday in Boston, speaking to the expatriate or the diaspora Cabo Verdean community, which is concentrated in eastern Massachusetts, and urge them to not just celebrate the close of the compact, but maybe think of investing more in their home country. So that's it. We'll go back to Chris.
Great. Thanks, Robert. And last but not least, let's hear from Dan, who's going to share more information about the selection process and the board's decisions from last month at that meeting.
Great. So thank you. As mentioned previously by Chris, the MCC Board of Directors newly selected Timor-Leste for a compact program and the Gambia for a threshold program. Now, specifically with Timor-Leste, MCC is quite excited to begin a compact program with them. Now, as you may all know, Timor-Leste was initially selected for a threshold program in December of 2016. Since that time, we've seen continued strong scorecard performance, and which demonstrates the country's commitment to good governance, investing in its people, and a commitment to economic freedom. Based on this strong continued scorecard performance and also the strong partnership we've had with Timor-Leste over the past year, the board decided to move it over to a compact program, which is really quite exciting prospect for us. Turning to the Gambia, again, we're excited to work with this country, which is an important country in West Africa, which is an area where MCC already has a strong presence. And it really is a great opportunity for MCC to engage with a country that is currently undergoing a democratic transition. And the Threshold Program is a program which can really help facilitate some reforms in this important process in the country. So those are the two new selects for us for this year. As part of the annual selection process, the board also reselects countries that are currently developing compacts. And with the reselections, the board reselected Burkina Faso, Mongolia, Senegal, Sri Lanka, and Tunisia, which will enable them to continue developing those compacts. Now, in addition to all of these decisions, the board also reselected Lesotho, and this was after a 2-year hiatus in compact development. This decision to reselect Lesotho was in recognition of the country's concrete steps over the past year, which demonstrated a commitment to addressing MCC's ongoing rule of law concerns. This decision will allow Lesotho to restart compact development, which is, again, a very exciting prospect for us. But the board also noted that it will continue to monitor events on the ground quite closely going forward, just to make sure that those rule of law concerns continue to be addressed. So that kind of closes out that's sort of the quick and dirty version of the readout of what happened. I'm happy to take questions in the question and answer portion, and I'll turn it back over to Chris.
Great. Thanks, Dan. And I'm going to exercise the moderator privilege and start with a few questions before we get into some of the questions that we've received and some questions from the crowd. Maybe first, sticking with Dan, can you tell us just a little bit again about the process behind how MCC's board selects countries, for those who may not recall or need a refresher?
Sure. So the primary mechanism we use are our annual scorecards, which you may all be familiar with, I don't know, which is a compilation of 20 different indicators which look at measures of good governance, democratic and just governance, investing in people, and also a commitment to economic freedom. The scorecards really try to distill down a sort of MCC's eligibility values. And so that's the first mechanism we use for analyzing countries to determine which would be the most appropriate partners. But in addition to the scorecards, we use what we call supplemental information, where we try to really get a strong understanding, qualitative and quantitative, of a country's scorecard or policy performance, and determine whether they would be a good partner for MCC.
And maybe, Robert, Dan mentioned, and I think I mentioned as well, that Timor was selected for a compact, the Gambia was selected for a threshold program development. There are probably some in the room or online who aren't familiar with the distinction between those two programs. So can you just explain a little bit about the difference between the programs?
Those are our two main product lines, compacts and threshold programs. Compacts are the larger 5-year time-limited grants for selected countries that meet all the eligibility criteria that Dan described. That's our 5-star program and the most prestigious program that we have. The threshold programs are smaller grants focused on policy and institutional reform in selected countries that not only come close to qualifying for the compact, but are trending in the right direction. And the idea is, they're committed to improving their policy performance and eventually, qualifying for a compact.
And I think we mentioned that actually Timor-Leste had been selected for a threshold program previously, and then this year the board selected them for compact eligibility. Can you talk about any other examples of countries where this has happened?
Right, so Timor-Leste gets upgraded, which is great for them and rewards them for their great policy performance. Other countries have had a threshold program and subsequently upgraded to a compact at a later date, such as Burkina Faso, Jordan, Indonesia, Malawi, and Niger. So it's not the first time, but it's we spoke on the phone to the Prime Minister of Timor-Leste. He was really thrilled. So it's a great moment of elevated prestige for them.
Great. And actually, while we're on that, I know Dan mentioned a bit about Lesotho, but can you tell us a little bit more about the board's decision regarding Lesotho?
Yeah, Lesotho was put on hold for a few years. They were in the process of developing a compact, and then there was an interruption of democratic rule there, and as a result, we had to suspend our activities. So they were very much in the mind of getting back in the good graces of the international community. They work closely with SADC, the Southern Africa Regional Development Organization, that sets standards and actually observed their re-democratization. And then they actually had a plan and they stuck to it. And we thought that they showed the commitments that are consistent with our compact. So the board reselected them.
And as everybody, I think, knows, a lot of work and effort goes into this process of getting to our December board meetings for selection. And maybe, Dan, you can just remind us, how often does this happen, and when will be the next time that the board will consider these sort of decisions?
Sure. So this is kind of an annual process. So December is sort of the big selection time. So it'll be another year before we're going to be coming back to selecting new countries. It's really just an annual process every December.
Great. Thanks, Dan, Robert, and Kirk. I'm going to take some questions from the audience. I think we've gotten a few in advance that we wanted to start with, and I know there may be some coming in online and some coming in from the audience. Just a reminder, if you want to, if you're joining us online and you want to send in a question, you can send it via Twitter or to events@mcc.gov. And then obviously for folks in the room, you have your cards. So just want to start with a few that, again, we had gotten in advance. The first is getting back to Cabo Verde. Robert, can you tell us, does MCC have any plans to engage with Cabo Verde sort of past this 5-year timeline or after this compact?
Journalists in Cabo Verde asked that question too. The answer is that we have finished our second compact and we don't anticipate having any additional formal MCC relationship with Cabo Verde, other than the final closeout contractual things that we still have to do. That said, one of the things that we hope to happen is that because of what MCC has done there, that it will make the country more amenable to private investment, and private investors will come and take advantage of the improved atmosphere. And to that end, during my time visiting there at the end of November, every place I went, I was with the American ambassador, Ambassador Heflin. And Ambassador Heflin would point out what are the ongoing avenues of relationship that the U.S. has with Cabo Verde, whether it's trade or there's even some military cooperation. We have lots of cooperation that existed before the MCC compact, for the first compact, and will continue long after the second compact. So it's not the end of the world when we close up our shops.
Thanks. And I had one other question that I think is a frequent question we get, but someone interested in learning more about how they can work with MCC in some way. What's the best way to learn about partnering or procurements or other opportunities with MCC? And I'll say we got one question actually in from the audience as well on the same theme that was specifically about, now that the Côte d'Ivoire Compact has been signed, when will procurement opportunities be released relating to implementation in Cabo Verde? So maybe on the general question, I'll turn first to Kirk and Robert, and then maybe Robert, some more information on the Cabo Verde piece as well, the Côte d'Ivoire.
Yeah, go to the website, the Work With Us page, for those who want to join MCC or, apply. Please let us know.
Right. Well, that's one part of the Work With Us website. The other part of the Work With Us website is pitched towards companies that want to bid on the procurements that are out there. obviously they're open to any company. We would like to see American companies bid aggressively for these contracts, and the details, the calendar of contracts and the amounts and the details are all available if you go to that part of the website. So if you represent a company, please visit that part of the website, and we want you in there trying to win the procurements. The track record is that American companies do very, very, very well when they actually bid. Our objective is to get more of them to bid in the first place.
And maybe a question back to our Congressional Public Affairs colleagues. There was a question about upcoming legislative priorities. Is there anything on the horizon for MCC that we are focused on?
Yet to be determined.
Yeah.
The CR ends on the 19th, so we'll see from there. I think that's the best answer.
Great. And so we've got just two questions for now. I'm sure there are more that came in from the audience. One, I think probably best for Robert to start, but are there a short list of potential projects for these two new countries? Maybe Timor-Leste we can start with since it's compact. The Gambia obviously is even more.
I didn't answer the second part of that question about Cote d'Ivoire. That compact is focused on education and transportation. And the transportation part is to sort of undo the bottlenecks and the traffic congestion in the city of Abidjan. Timor-Leste, it's a little bit early in the game. Up to now, we've been thinking of it as a threshold program, and the constraints to growth study that was done by American and Timorese economists showed that there are some areas that are the constraints to growth relating to their use of their sovereign wealth fund, which is based on oil reserves, that they have to have a better plan for how to spend that money. Their political economy they need to be more business friendly is another area that we and their economists identified. A third area is that their exchange rate is overvalued, so-called Dutch disease, because of the oil and gas reserves. And the last one is in the human development area, which is both education and malnutrition. So that's another area where, in fact, we had a program that dealt with that in the neighboring country of Indonesia, so maybe there can be lessons learned from there. But we haven't gotten to the point where we're going to actually specifically design projects around any of these areas. We have to go to the next phase where we get to the root causes and figure out what would be the most suitable project to do to address these problems.
And on that same thing, I'll cover the Gambia. The Gambia was just selected as a threshold country partner, and like our compact development process, the very first step in the threshold program development process will be a constraints analysis to identify what are the binding constraints to economic growth in the Gambia. And from there, as Robert I think elaborated, the program itself would focus on policy and institutional challenges or issues that are in those areas of binding constraints. So it's quite early, I mean, almost before first contact in the context of the Gambia. So really no shortlisted projects. That'll come, that is a data-driven process here at MCC where we're going to look first at what those binding constraints are to determine what sectors we should be in, and then do a root cause analysis to figure out what it is that are the right investments to make to unlock growth in those sectors from a policy and institutional perspective. So we've definitely gotten a few more questions from the audience. Let me take one actually that is for Dan here. There was a question asked about whether we could elaborate on the status of the Philippines Second Compact and whether MCC is still pursuing a second compact with the Philippines, or really maybe just what the discussion was at the board meeting.
Sure. So as you all may be aware, prior to the board meeting, the Philippines notified us that they were withdrawing from the partnership with MCC. So MCC, then the board noted that decision, and we really note that we're proud of the achievements that we had on our first compact with the Philippines. And both MCC and the United States are proud of our longstanding partnership with the Philippines. But at this point, there will be no further work on the second compact.
Thank you. Got one question as well, just to review the current portfolio of countries in compact and threshold program status. Maybe maybe we'll start with compacts, and I'll ask Robert to talk a bit about that, and then we can also cover the threshold program.
Okay, that's a pretty big chunk to chew on.
Well, I think let's just cover the countries in the portfolio. I don't know that we need to get into all the specific projects.
Mention them, and then if you have follow-up questions on details, we can go a little bit deeper. We divide up the world into two segments. One is Africa, and the other is the whole rest of the world. And actually, believe it or not, there are more compacts in Africa than there are in the whole rest of the world. So in West Africa, we have compacts in Benin, Ghana, that are actually in progress. Morocco, in Malawi, and Zambia, and Ghana. We have compacts in development in Morocco and Tunisia. And also Cote d'Ivoire is about to be launched, and Niger is about to be launched this month, and Burkina Faso is in development. Did I miss? Senegal is in development as well. Power electricity compact. So that's Africa. In the whole rest of the world, there's one compact in this hemisphere, which is El Salvador, which is its second compact. In Europe, we have Georgia, which is an education-based compact, and then we have a concentration in South Asia, where there's a brand new compact that's about to be launched in Nepal. We just signed it this past year, and then Sri Lanka also in development. Southeast Asia, we have we finished the Philippines first compact, and as Dan mentioned, we're not going to do a second one. We're closing out the Indonesia compact in April, and we're in development of a new compact in Mongolia. So that'll be northeast Asia. Did I miss one?
Liberia, I think, as well. Just
look at that. Liberia, they just had a presidential election a few weeks ago, and the inauguration is going to be later this month, and we have an electric power compact with Liberia. I'm sorry I missed that.
Right, and the threshold program is much a smaller group of countries, so I'll just quickly go through that. And some of you may know we sort of changed some of the focus of the threshold program a few years ago, and so we're still building out a new portfolio of countries. So currently within the threshold program, there are 3 in implementation, 4 in implementation now if you count Kosovo actually. So it is Guatemala, Honduras, Sierra Leone, and Kosovo are implementing threshold programs. In addition to that, as we said, the Gambia has just been selected to develop a threshold program, and Togo is a program in a country that we're still continuing to work on and monitor in light of some events on the ground there. But that program is very well developed and potentially could begin implementation at some point in the future. And Sierra Leone, sorry, Nathan. So maybe another question for Robert here. There's a question online. Once funds have been allocated from MCC for a specific project, is there a timeline associated with these funds and when they must be used?
Well, we have, I think it's unique in the development agency world, where we have a hard 5-year time clock from the moment we declare entry into force, which we don't do just sort of haphazardly. Certain things have to be in place before we do that. We will build certain conditions, whether the government has to pass certain laws or regulations, and they have to stand up the counterpart agency, which you call a Millennium Challenge account, which is actually the country's implementing agency. That all has to be in place, and then we flip the switch or whatever symbolism you want, and that starts a 5-year time clock. And there's no flexibility with that. We say we are not going to even start a project that we don't think we can complete in 5 years. So as you move along that time clock towards the end of the 5-year period, whatever you don't finish, you don't get the money. You have to spend the money that we've allocated within those 5 years, or you have to give it back. And there have been countries where that's been the case. So it requires a certain amount of discipline, both on the part of the host country and ourselves, to make sure that we can get this stuff done in 5 years. And it works. I think the discipline focuses the mind and gets people to really diligently prepare and execute these projects.
So I think we've got a variety of different questions coming in. There's one more that I think is on potentially on the compact side, so maybe turn to that one so that Robert can continue. But what kind of leadership development programs do you provide to compact country leaders or implementing partners to assure project success or program success? Is there anything like that we could speak to?
Well, before we would actually do any leadership training, we work very closely with the host country to make sure, and then with like headhunting contractor firms, to make sure they pick the absolute best qualified people to lead these Millennium Challenge account organizations. These are people, to begin with, are going to be the cream of the crop of talent in their countries. What we do after that, we have certain training that's required. There's a seminar that we do on anti-fraud and corruption that's mandatory. And then during the life of the compacts, we will often bring people to Washington for what we call infrastructure college or sector operations college. So these are in-service training events for the experts in those particular areas that we're teaching or giving some sort of training on. What's interesting that what we found is that a lot of these people are the best trainers themselves. That there's a lot of sharing information, what works, what are the best practices, and from one country that can be shared in another. So when we bring them all to Washington, I think they learn more from each other than they do from us or the people that we bring in to lead some of the sessions.
Thanks. It looks like I think there are two questions that are probably best for Dan to address. The first one, and since I mentioned Togo, maybe we can start there. Just to comment on the progress of the Togo Threshold Program or the situation in Togo.
Sure. So at the December meeting, MCC's Board of Directors did discuss recent events on the ground in Togo. And the board noted that it's been encouraged by the possibility of inclusive dialogue in Togo as a way to resolve the current political impasse. But the board is going to continue to monitor developments on the ground before it makes a decision on the proposed threshold program. And prior to signing a grant agreement, in particular, MCC is going to seek clear assurances of the government's firm commitment to respecting citizens' both political and civil rights, liberties. So we're just kind of waiting to see how things play out right now. There's another question?
Right. Sorry. And there was one other question just relating to what factors go into deciding whether to start a second compact for a specific country. And does MCC prioritize new first compacts or second compacts? How do we go about thinking about that type of decision?
Sure. So that's a great question. I wouldn't say that MCC has a specific prioritization of first compacts over second compacts or vice versa. We really just revert back to our general eligibility criteria, which is we look at scorecard performance. How is a country doing on the scorecard as sort of our first filter, and then we move on to see whether they would be an appropriate partner. Now, in the context of considering a country for a possible second compact, we have a higher bar we refer to for the country. So if they've completed their first compact, one of the things we're trying to really look at is how did the first compact go? Did they successfully implement it? Were there challenges? Did it go well? What kind of a partner was the country? So that's a key consideration for considering a country for a second compact. In addition to that, we also look for improved scorecard performance. So we want to see an improvement on the scorecard, not just maintaining the performance. Now, this can be a bit subjective because it depends. If a country is passing 18 or 19 indicators on the scorecard, there's not much room for improvement. So, it's a judgment call. But we are looking for a general improvement in performance. And in addition to those two criteria, we're also looking for a commitment to deep sectoral reforms, because one of the things that MCC compacts are increasingly looking for is a commitment to reform. And so if we're doing energy projects or road projects, we're looking for the country to really have a commitment to changing how they do things in addition to just building infrastructure, for instance. So we look at all three of these in terms of determining whether a second compact would be appropriate with a country. And again, this decision happens every December during the annual selection process, and we spend the whole fall sort of looking at the scorecards and looking at these broader criteria to determine whether a country is meeting these criteria.
Great, and we've got one more here that maybe I'll start with and see if my colleagues have anything to add. But there was a question about how does MCC plan for proposed cuts in foreign assistance or foreign affairs. And I guess I would start by saying, we are currently in the budget phase at this point, and MCC has enjoyed and continues to enjoy bipartisan support on the Hill, as well as strong support from Office of Management and Budget and the administration. And we're, I think as Kirk referred to earlier, we're looking forward to continuing to work with Capitol Hill throughout the appropriation process to figure out and determine what final envelope of resources is available for MCC and FY18 and FY19 for us to make available and work with our partner countries to sign new and potentially second compacts and threshold programs. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add.
I would just add that MCC is a very small government agency, just a little bit more than 300 people, and we haven't grown at all, and we don't have any plans to increase our staff no matter what happens to the compact budget. We just work within the small staff that we have, and I think that impresses our stakeholders on the Hill and in OMB that we're not trying to build an empire here.
Oh, great. Okay. So exactly one more question here. So there was a question: is Jordan still eligible for compact programs, and if not, why?
So great question. So every year, MCC has something called the candidate pool, which really consists of whether a country is either a low-income or lower middle-income country, as classified by the World Bank. Now, Jordan recently, it had graduated out of the pool. It had become an upper middle-income country for a few years, but then it fell back into the pool this last year because its GNI per capita ranked it as a lower middle-income country, which means that MCC could run the scorecard on the country and consider it. However, Jordan does not pass the scorecard because it does not pass the democratic rights indicators, which is a requirement to pass the scorecard. So it was not up for consideration this year. But for the question, it is currently in our income pool, so it can be considered. The World Bank releases its income data on July 1st of every year, so we'll see if Jordan continues to be in the pool as of July 1st this coming year. We'll see.
Great, and I think one more question that I have at least is for Kirk and for CPA. Are there any sort of legislative authorities or other legislation relating to MCC that are kind of in progress or on the Hill?
Yeah, besides the CR, which I mentioned earlier, regional authority is something that MCC is definitely looking forward to working with the Hill on. Markets, trade, jobs don't end at borders. And by giving us regional authority, we are able to make our investments grow, far more than what we have money-wise. So MCC is well-positioned, ready to increase the impact of investments by exploring regional partnerships. The investments expand access to vital services like electricity, transportation, education, clean water, and they connect people to jobs, markets, and opportunities. So hopefully we'll see Capitol Hill work with us on that.
Thank you. And thanks, everyone. I don't know, I'm looking to my colleagues in the crowd to see if there are any more questions, but it looks like there are not. So if there are no more questions, I guess I would just thank my colleagues and the panelists and thank all of you joining us here in person and then the folks joining us online and say see you next quarter and stay tuned. And reminder, as we refer to, please continue to check out the website. Please look at the Work With Us page if you're interested in future procurement or partnership or even career opportunities, and continue to watch our Twitter feed. Thanks so much and have a great day. Yeah, I don't know. Possible. Hi, how are you?
I just want to have a quick question.
Sure.
Are there other metrics that MCC looks at other than the World Bank data in determining the compact and the threshold?
So the World Bank data comes in a couple of ways. So the World Bank data is the exclusive source for us for our income information, and that tells us which countries of the world we're allowed to work with, because we are statutorily, we can only work with lower income countries or lower middle income countries, and the World Bank sets those numbers for us, and that's a statutory requirement. In terms of once those countries are in those candidate pools, our scorecard has these 20 indicators, and those pull data from